Welcome to the LV podcast with your host, me, Michelle Hall. I am so excited that you decided to tune in today to the podcast, the LV podcast with Michelle Hall. Now listen, we have just entered 2022. So at the time that I'm recording this podcast, we have not too long, just a few days, have entered into 2022. And I am so excited about this year. Yeah, I'm saying excited. I'm excited about what's to come. We have had a tumultuous time the last few years, but in the midst of those times, I can look back and also see some joys during those times. And some of my friends, they got married during those times, and some of them had children, and some things that were impossible, it seemed impossible to some people, those things actually happened while the pandemic was happening. So as I was reflecting on this past year of 2021 and looking into 2022, I started to look at perspective and what shifts our perspective, what kind of things that shifts our perspective. And when I looked at that, I thought about stories. It's the stories, the way that we tell our stories, the way that we think about our stories, the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we let other people know about, the stories that we walk in, that can shift or shape our perspective. So what I'm going to ask you today is, what's your story? Right? What is your story? What is your story? What is your story? According to the definition, there are two definitions of what a story is. In the first place, is one of them is an account of imaginary or real people and events told for entertainment purposes. Right? So if there's an account of an imaginary or real people and events told for entertainment. The second one, which is what I really want to focus on, is an account of past events in someone's life and in the evolution of something. And I know that in the definition it says life or in the evolution of something, but I really want to I'd like to say this: your story is evolving. Your story is evolving. Even your past story, the way that you see your past story, that can also evolve. That's if you let it. That's if you let it. So I'm asking you, what's your story? What's your story? Well, I can look at the stories that I've replayed, and a lot of them are real events, right? There were some real events that happened along the way of my story on this life journey. A lot of things that took place were kind of revealed on my way of this life journey. I've had some experiences, as I know you all have. We all have experience from the time that we entered this earth until this moment in time. And how we tell those stories. Someone asked us a question like, well, where are you from? What was that like? We all have a story of how we portray it and how we tell those stories. Some of those stories are true. Some of those stories may not be so true. It may be an experience that you feel or a feeling that you felt at the time that you want to hold on to. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I remembered when I was a little girl and it was time for me to go to kindergarten. And my parents, it was very important, that you got into, even at kindergarten, got into like a really good kind of kindergarten program. Even back then, y'all, I'm dating myself, even in the 70s. And now I see the whole lot of applications to get into pre-K and kindergarten. But at that time, there was some things that were taking place. And so there was a story. Something happened where I went to look at a school. My parents sent me to, put me in a school to check out this particular school, and it was to determine whether I was going to be at that school. Well, the way that I remember the story and I tell the story, there was a mishap that happened there. And while I was at the school, I was attacked by another young man. Another young boy in the school was mean to me, and he hit me, and then so I hit him back, right? And the teacher only saw that I had hit that person back and started to charge after me. So I got scared and ran away. I still remember, like, this story is so vivid in my brain, right? And then at the end, I just remembered at the end, them, my parents coming to me and telling me, well, because this took place, I could not be in that school. And it was a whole thing. And all the stuff that was attached to that story, even at 5 years old, what was attached to that story, I felt like, there's still some feelings that would come with that story. Like, man, what happened? But I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't the wrong one. I felt ashamed because I felt like my parents, I disappointed my parents and disappointed my family, because now my parents couldn't say, well, okay, she's going to this particular private school or what have you. And so because of all of those things that were going on at that time, and I felt like that came up again later, because later on there was a time we were going to go to another school. There was a Catholic school we were going to go to at the time. And then because of, I guess, what had happened at that particular school, I just assumed I didn't get into the school, but I'm being honest. I remember, because of the story of how I experienced the story and how I understood the story, the feelings attached to that story, to those events, the feeling that's attached to that caused me to have an attachment to it that automatically said I didn't get into that school because of what happened when I was 5, or because I did something wrong. Well, I'm sharing all of that to say, well, let's flip the script now. Let's look at the story. Let's look at the story. Now that I look at the story, I can see the story. Now the story is different. The story is that I came into a school. I went to a school that I did not quite fit into the school. That really meant there were a whole lot of dynamics I didn't understand. I went into an environment that I didn't understand, but I still came through the environment and had enough courage to stand up for myself. And then after standing up for myself, I had enough courage to tell everyone that that's what happened. And then I didn't stay in that situation. And even at 5 years old, for the rest of my life, I still stand up. I still stand up when I need to stand up. I still stand strong. And just from that moment, that same stick-to-itiveness, that same fervor, that same strength, that same courageousness I carry throughout my life. Okay, so yes, so when I had some challenges, I'm not sure when it was time for college. Okay, I'm getting into school. Let's see. I had a different view. I said, no, I'll get into the school I'm supposed to get into. I'm going to get into a good school. Why? Because of that time I remembered I stood up for myself. Do you see how I could spin that story? But now if I sat there and focused on the shame that was attached to the story, the shame that I thought was the case, and to be honest, my parents probably have not even, after that situation, some years, they probably don't even, my dad probably doesn't even remember the situation now. But do you see how all that time, that one story could have shape some things in your life, in my life? So what I'm telling you, what's your story? What's your story, and how are you telling your story? You can, come on, look back at those stories. Somebody come to you and ask you, well, what's your story? What's your story? How do you tell the events that happened in your life? Sometimes you have to look back. When you look back on the past, and you have to sometimes acknowledge the past, look for the good things. Look for the things that came through the story. Look for the hardships that happened, but then see how you persevered in the hardship. Look at where God brought you from when you were in the situation when it started, okay? Because all those things, that's why I tell you, thank you for coming on this life journey with me. I appreciate that you go on the life journey with me, because life is a journey, and it's a series of ups and downs. And there's a time to cry, a time to dance. There's a time for everything and season under the sun, right? So the thing about it is all of those things are part of your life process. All of those things are part of your life's journey. It is a part of your story. So what's your story? Listen, my story isn't all bad. I don't know about yours, but I'm telling you that my story isn't all bad. And because I know, just looking at that, there's ways we can look at the stories. I know yours isn't all bad either. Why? Because you are still here. Oh yes, you're still here. And you made it to 2022, and there's still some things that your story is evolving. See, my story in the past, that story just evolved right here in this podcast, because the story started out that I was not triumphant. The story started out with shame. But when I told the story the second time, the story now starts out with being victorious, triumphant. There were some things that I learned in that story. It is still important to stand up. It is still important to go forward. It's never, I don't care what's coming at you. I don't care who's running after you. I don't care what enemy comes at you. There's never a reason for you to give up. You trust God. You stand on his word and you continue on and watch. Be courageous in God. Trust him in everything that he's doing. What's your story? What story are you saying? If you find yourself that you're sitting and you feel you're stagnant, you really haven't taken hold to the story. You haven't taken hold. That's just a part of your journey. This is just a part of your story. Come on. Let's look at it. I could tell the story. I could tell so many stories. There's so many stories I look at. I have told the story so many times of even my move and everything else. And there was a time, all the time, I realized part of the story was there was one moment in time when I made the move and I could not believe that I had actually made the move. It's like once it all happened, when everything was said and done, I was right in the in-between. I was sitting, getting ready to start looking for apartments and everything. And that one day I froze because I kept looking. So every time I would tell the story, that's the part that I would focus on. And then as I'm looking at this, what's your story? No, my story, the story is that I had faith and I stepped out on faith. And even when I got to a place where I didn't feel anything, the closest person took 4 hours to get to me by car. You would have to drive hours or get on planes. Anybody that knew me to get to me by car, that the story was I knew that and I still went. The story was I knew that and God still brought me through. The story was that I understood I was scared, but I didn't stop. So listen, sitting in a place that your story may not look so good, because if I had told somebody the story at the moment I was laying in the bed and couldn't get out of bed for that moment because I realized I was frozen in fear. If I told the story at that point, even if I told the story 6 months after that, told the story 2 years after that, that's the part that I focused on. But I'm telling you the story today. That moment laying in the bed, that moment was the moment I chose no matter what, I'm going to make it. No matter what, I'm going to persevere. No matter what, I'm going to be right there. So listen, y'all. Make sure that you are telling the right story. Make sure that you're telling the right story. Make sure that God continues that you continue to trust God as he walks you through this thing called life. What's your story? What's your story? Your story is still evolving. You are still growing. God is still moving. He's still writing your story. Watch your story unfold. All right, family, that's the podcast for today. Pray that it blessed you. Listen, go through your day, your week in victory, knowing that God can do anything but fail. So until next time, continued blessings, and listen, what is your story? And you better have a new answer, a new spin, because your story is forever evolving, and God is still writing your story. Until next time, be blessed.